I still can say good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, indeed, actually. It's not easy to talk about Kurdistan, let's say, even within academia, actually. It has been marginalized, but in a negative way, actually. So probably what you can see today and hear from me would be unprecedented. Okay, so let's start with the historical legal background of Kurdistan. I'm going to go back to 17th century, very briefly, actually. The Treaty of Sèvres, it's a city in eastern Kurdistan, marked the Turkish-Persian border, and accordingly, 70% of Kurdistan actually came under the control of Ottoman Empire. You could see a map. I got lots of maps for you. Back in 17th century, you could see Mongolia, Persian Empire, Ottoman Empire. And here is a map drawn by the French in the 19th century, actually, from, let's say, from the Gulf to Mediterranean Sea. And after that, Kurdish autonomous entities were aborted in the following century as centralized states imposed by the European powers revoke earlier long-standing Kurdish regional autonomy arrangement. So you could see those autonomous, let's say, regions or principality emirate in Kurdistan. But the first founding document of the modern Middle East actually is Sykes-Picot Sazonov. Well, probably you only heard Sykes-Picot, but I call actually Sykes-Picot Sazonov because none of those, let's say, works mentioned anything about the Russian side of the, let's say, as I call it, collusion. Sykes-Picot Sazonov actually was the outcome of several letters exchanged between, let's say, Edward Grey, British Foreign Secretary, Paul Cambon, French ambassador in London, and Sergei Sazonov, Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs. By virtue of that agreement, or collusion actually, Ottoman Empire would have been parted into, let's say, Sicilia, Lebanon, Syria for France, Iraq and Palestine for Britain, Istanbul and the Strait for Russia, and finally, actually, southern Anatolia for Italy, Zone C, and international zone, Jerusalem extending toward Gaza to Dead Sea, which is brown zone in the map, actually. You could see this is an original map, which I actually have been accessed. I was able to access this map by buying a very, let's say, expensive book. And here, a closer look at areas of Palestine under Sykes-Picot Sazonov, 1916. You can see that. The areas under protection of Great Britain in purple. And the other one, actually, British rule, the Akko, or Acre, actually, Bay. According to Sykes-Picot Sazonov, Kurdistan would have been parted into French administered area, the blue area, British administered area, B, Russian administered area, today's Armenia and Azerbaijan, and Persian sphere. But all of these actually was provisional. None of them was, let's say, and nothing was finalized until the League mandate system. I'll talk about Persian sphere, why it remained intact in the next few slides, actually. So you could see another, let's say, color map of Sykes-Picot Sazonov here by Professor Michael Izadi. So the Allies actually asserted their interest in national rights to self-determination following World War I, And also President Wilson, in his 14 points in January 1918, assessed the destiny of non-Turkish nationality, which are now under Turkish administration, should be assured an undoubted security of life and unmolested opportunity of autonomous development. And finally, Britain and France promised the complete and final liberation of people under the Turks by means of native government and administration upon the principle of self-determination. When in, let's say, on 9th of November 1918. At the Paris Peace Conference, the Treaty of Sèvres was signed between the Ottomans and other, let's say, government. I want to mention their name, actually. Probably you only heard about the British government, but it was between the Ottomans on one side and at the other side the principal allied powers, British Empire, France, Italy, and Japan, and the allied powers, Armenia, Belgium, the Hijaz, today Saudi Arabia, Poland, Portugal, Romania, Serb-Croat Slovene state, and Czechoslovakia. By virtue of according to the Treaty of Sèvres, actually, it was signed in the French city of Sèvres. That's why it's called Sèvres. Article 62, which is about Kurdistan, postulated within 6 months a local autonomy, and in Article 64, Kurds were granted independence within 1 year. If actually a majority of them, people in Kurdistan desire independence from Turkey, and also the Council of the League then considered these peoples are capable of such independence and recommends that it should be granted to them. So here a map of the Treaty of Sèvres. You could see that actually it's a small area because it hasn't, let's say, the Eastern Kurdistan in Persia and Western Kurdistan in Syria was not included. So actually, if the treaty had been implemented, Kurdistan would have been broken up into multiple smaller segments, with the independence portion being least prosperous. You could see that actually. I have another map here. The white and yellow area which was Kurdistan according to the Treaty of Sèvres. So what happened to self-determination and the Covenant of the League of Nations? Well, self-determination was not included, was not incorporated in the Covenant. And it said Article 10 underscore regard for territorial integrity of state, and self-determination was classified as a right of advanced nations, which was actually included in Article 22 as mandate system. The Turks actually didn't accept the Sèvres Treaty, and the British government actually was reluctant to implement the treaty, and finally they decided, actually, especially British government through an armistice of the armistice of Mudanya between, as I said, between the British government and Turkish nationalists on the 11 October 1922, the treaty of the abortive, let's say, Treaty of Sèvres were to be renegotiated. So in the treaty, there was no mention of the Kurds or Kurdistan or any rights about them. So indeed, Kurds were recognized as a socio-political nation after the World War I, but Kurdish independence negatively would have affected the Allies' political and economic interests, and accordingly, the League of Nations actually abandoned its support for independence Kurdistan. So indeed, it was alien determination, or outsiders, actually, who decided the destiny of these people. Iraq actually had already been created, but its survival was contingent, actually, on the southern part of Kurdistan. So we had a commission of inquiry of Mosul Vilayet, which is now, let's say, northern Iraq, the Commission confirmed that an independent Kurdish state should be created since the Kurds form 5/8 of the population, and their national consciousness is definitely Kurdish and not for Iraq. But unfortunately, it recommended the attachment of Vilayet to Iraq as the most advantageous settlement, which was actually about the strategic interest of Britain. You could see that the border here between Iraq and Turkey. So finally, Turkey, Britain, and Iraq actually settled the dispute, the Mosul dispute actually, and they signed the tripartite Treaty of Angora or Ankara in 1926, which marked the definite and inviolable frontier between Turkey and Iraq, and ceding southern Kurdistan to Iraq, and finally assigning a 10% share of the oil resources to Turkey for 25 years. So the implication of all these treaties actually was the creation of Turkey in 1926. Why in 1926? Because, as I said, the Mosul dispute was resolved in 1926. Although actually Article 2 recognized Turkey, the modern Turkey today actually, as Turkey, I mean the name. Then we had Anglo-Iraqi Treaty of Alliance in 1922. So Iraq was created in 1932, actually after a falsified report by the British government, and Iraq became a member of the League of Nations. And then creation of Iran, actually we had a change in its name in 1936. Well, previously it was Persia, actually. Some resources, I would be able to give those resources, actually, that allege the name was suggested by Hitler. Yeah. And so why the borders of Persia remained intact? Because Persia and the British government had a, let's say, treaty, Anglo-Persian treaty, signed on 19th of August 1919, so, and by which the British government was obliged to be firm with the territorial integrity of Persia, but still having decisive control over customs, oils, and soil of Persia. And we had also French mandate for Syria and Lebanon, which ended up in creation of Syria in 1946. Actually, France recognized the independence. And what happened to the Kurds of the Soviet Union? Well, most of them deported to the other Soviet republics. For your information, we had Red Kurdistan or Kransi Kurdistan from 1923 with the recognition of the Kurds actually in the Soviet Union until 1930, which actually finally was reincorporated into Azerbaijan by Stalin. The region was between the Soviet Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh or Artsakh region. And also we had Republic of Kurdistan in 1945 to 1946, actually. It had a very short life in eastern Kurdistan because they didn't have any protection from the central government in Tehran, and there was a deal between Russia and and Iran, actually, regarding oil resources. So finally, Mahabad was retaken by the regime, and its leader, Qasim Mohammed, and other ministers were executed. So since that time, since 1926, Kurd host state, Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Turkey, actually adopted Persianization, Turkification, Arabization, migration of non-Kurds to Kurdistan, assimilationist policy, linguicides, cultural appropriation, seize of land, internal colonization, and ethnic cleansing, which is now underway in Rojava, Western Kurdistan, the occupied territory by Turkey, actually. For your information, actually, we have Arab settlements in Rojava, Western Kurdistan, funded by a Palestinian organization based in Istanbul. You could actually find the link for what I, let's say. So the outcome of all these policy is the reduction of, let's say, territory of Kurdistan, as you could see here, which is the, let's say, modern Kurdistan across 4 different states. So finally, in 1946, self-determination was accepted as one of the purposes of the United Nations. Article 1, paragraph 2, to develop friendly relations among nations based on respect for the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples, and to take other appropriate measures to strengthen universal peace. We also had a decolonization campaign in 1960, by which the United Nations General Assembly adopted the Resolution 1514 on the granting of independence to colonial countries and people. What about the Kurds? Well, they didn't fit this framework, actually. Why? Because they had already been split up among decolonized states, and it's that their host state, Syria and Iraq and Iran, actually, themselves acquired independence and statehood, apparently on their behalf. In 1966, finally, self-determination has been was recognized as a legal right. In Article 1, common to both International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, by which all peoples have the right of self-determination. By virtue of that right, they freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. So self-determination is now to be invoked by the whole people or population of a state. So in practice, it means internal self-determination. Why internal? Because it should be exercised within the current boundaries of a state. So it takes the form of self-government, autonomy, or devolution, for example, as in the UK, Scots and Irish people have. Again, although actually Kurds are the paradigm of distinct people of self-determination because of their well-defined peoplehood, but they do not occupy a discrete territory. They have been divided actually into 4 Kurdistani segments: Eastern Kurdistan, Southern Kurdistan, Northern Kurdistan, Western Kurdistan, which is known as Rojava. Roj means day, and Ava means set. So where the sun set, it's called Rojava in Kurdish. Why I'm using this term? Because actually these terms were used by the British government up until 1926, when the Mosul Vilayet was resolved. So again, Kurds continue to lack recognized status up until today and are still denied their own sovereign state, and this is actually challenge the actual strength of the legal principle of self-determination. But with Jin Jian Azadi, women, life, freedom, as the echoing call, actually, Kurds have, as always, have renewed their fight for self-determination that can be achieved to empower distinct, modern, forward-looking people. Well, it could have some outcome, actually, that could serve as the catalyst leading to a more peaceful region. And this slogan, resounding worldwide, may yet inspire other people to throw off oppressive regime. Over the last 3 decades, Kurds in southern Kurdistan and Rojava have managed to keep stability and security and thriving economies in the territories under their control, in contrast to the violence, actually, that has characterized in the wider Middle East. Even in terms of governability, the Kurdish regions are functioning much better than their neighbors. And this has been achieved through the high price for the Kurds that have paid for their legitimate rights. Thanks very much.